Good afternoon. My name is Sarah Montano, and I am here to present on the topic of evacuation behavior and psychological factors. This is a fascinating topic because it is applicable to real-life situations and to all populations. In addition to discussing this topic, I will present on a proposed study investigating social cues in regards to evacuation behavior. The research topic for this presentation is evacuation behavior and psychological factors. The purpose of this research is to better understand the attributes that affect people's decision-making processes and subsequent behavior during crisis situations where evacuation is necessary. So this might be a man-made disaster, such as an active shooter case, or a natural disaster, such as a hurricane. By understanding these processes and behaviors, safety measures can be improved and lives can be saved during both the natural disasters and man-made crises. So in order to conduct a new study, it is important to understand the current state of research. So the current state of research of evacuation behavior and psychological factors is that it is a well-studied topic. So there have been several studies on emergencies and how they affect people's behavior in those emergencies. And as mentioned before, these include both man-made emergencies such as house fires and natural disasters such as tsunamis or wildfires. However, as I will point out later in the presentation, there are gaps in the research that warrant further investigation and the need for my proposed study. So the studies that have already been done have focused on both individual and collective factors. So researchers have studied risk perception, demographic variables, experience with other emergencies or emergency training, and personal awareness at the individual level. At the collective level, social cues have been investigated to determine how people react to the opinions of others and the behaviors of others during an emergency situation. So first I will start by outlining these studies and discuss important concepts and conclusions, as well as how these concepts inform my own research study. So the studies that I will focus on are divided into groups based on the type of emergencies. So there's tsunamis, wildfires, hurricanes, active shooter and physical attacks, and building and house fires. So I will discuss some of the research that is most relevant to these emergencies and to my present study, but I won't go into extensive detail for each study. I just want you to be able to see what past research has found regarding human behavior during evacuation procedures and how this information is important for improving safety measures. So we'll start with tsunamis. Tsunamis in the United States can occur along the coastlines as well as around islands. So for example, Oregon and Hawaii have very different landscapes and locations. However, they have both been affected by tsunamis. So I evaluated 2 studies in these areas, and both utilize hypothetical tsunami events to measure different variables. So I'll start in Newport, Oregon, where Chen et al. Conducted an evacuation drill. So the researchers in this study utilized a mapping application called Strava that participants placed on their phones to measure their location, evacuation time, and choice of evacuation route during a tsunami drill. The researchers were interested in seeing how the terrain and environmental factors influence walking speed, and they wanted to see how this impacted the ability to evacuate quickly. It was found that flatter terrain, younger age, daylight hours, and shorter distance to safety were related to less walking speed. By contrast, starting at a location closer to the ocean, being on rough terrain or in nighttime conditions, and being older were all related to longer evacuation times. So this study was important because it gathered feedback from participants who said that the drill was beneficial in training them on best routes. And one of the goals of the research is to improve safety measures. So getting feedback from participants is important. And when they say that a specific study or a program was beneficial in training them to be more prepared, that's exactly what researchers want to see. So it also pointed out that the importance of precise signage to help individuals locate safety quickly. So basically, as people were evacuating, there are different signs indicating where the safe houses were, the safe places were, um, and then participants said that that was really helpful to just kind of guide them through in an emergency situation where stress levels are high. So that was a study by Chen et al. The other study was done by Kim et al. And they used a simulated tsunami in Waikiki, Hawaii. They used an agent-based model, or an ABM, to simulate the event. And ABMs are pretty common in the literature when using simulations because you can manipulate different factors. And so the ABMs will come up in a couple of studies. So given the danger of these events, simulations are often used to model behavior and interactions between others. So Kim et al. Looked at time. It took participants to clear the area and the factors related to casualties. So they were actually looking at people who were likely to perish just based on their evacuation time. They found that participants who chose not to evacuate had the highest casualty rates because obviously they weren't leaving their homes, so their evacuation time was 0. They also found that participants who evacuated by car were not as efficient as the participants who evacuated vertically or by foot. So traffic congestion is a major problem in natural disasters, as we'll be seeing more when we get to hurricanes. But vertical evacuation is basically evacuating to a higher building during certain disasters such as tsunamis. And this can be effective again in certain disaster situations like tsunamis because you're avoiding the water and the waves. Vehicle evacuation again can be problematic because of the congestion that results. And then evacuating by foot was also found to reduce time that would be spent in congested areas if you're taking a car. So the researchers also wanted to see the impact of additional time given for evacuation and adding different escape routes. So in the simulations, they added an additional bridge that would help people to evacuate faster. And they also added a simulation where there was more time to evacuate. People were notified quicker and they had a little bit more time. And they found that both of those measures actually reduced the time it took for people to get to safety. So they concluded that these were helpful safety measures to take. So this is important research because it demonstrated that what people may think is the best option, namely the car, is not always the fastest. It also showed that officials could work with the community members to increase evacuation order time when able to, and to ensure there are multiple safety routes to avoid a lot of congestion. So next we'll talk about wildfires. A lot of studies have been done on wildfires, particularly in California and Colorado. So I'll briefly go over 3 of them. First, the Kincaid Fire in California was a pretty massive fire. It actually forced 200,000 residents to evacuate. And Kulagowski et al. Wanted to evaluate risk perception and evacuation decisions. So they were looking more at people's perception of risk and how that impacted their decision to leave their homes or not. And they were fascinated by this because just because a risk is acknowledged doesn't mean that it will lead to desired action. So people who were part of the evacuation were surveyed to determine their thoughts on the fire. The researchers found that while people did know the risks, they did not always personalize the risk as affecting them directly. They did end up evacuating. Most individuals did evacuate, but threat assessment and risk perception were positively correlated. So basically, the researchers concluded that the individuals needed to assess the issue as like a personal threat before they would perceive it as a risk themselves and actually evacuate. The study showed that individuals had to evaluate the event as threatening to themselves and perceive a risk large enough to make the decision to evacuate. And interestingly, alerts came mainly from technology and neighbors. So there wasn't a lot of community official mandates to evacuate. So the role of neighbors and social cues will be further discussed when looking at studies of hurricanes, but it wasn't an important factor in this study. So then, similar to Kuligowski et al.'s focus on risk perception, Stratowitz and Paviglio looked at assessment of fire danger and participants' actual decisions to evacuate. And what was interesting about this study is the impact of gender. So they specifically evaluated personal characteristics such as gender and how they relate to alternatives to evacuate. So typically, evacuation is looked at, but they also looked at stay and defend and shelter in place because these are two alternatives to evacuation, particularly in the case of wildfires. And statistically, in the past research, men have been found to be more likely to stay and defend than women. Women are more likely to evacuate, whereas men are more likely to stay in their homes and try to defend their homes against the fires. So the study had over 50% males, and they also found that about half of the participants chose to stay and defend, while 30% evacuated. So this is important because demographic variables like gender can inform training programs and preparation materials to help residents make the best choices for them and their families. And then lastly, there was a fire in California again called the California Camp Fire. And Grajdura et al. Looked at this fire as it was a rapidly spreading fire and there was not a lot of evacuation time available. They also used an ABM, an agent-based model, and data from the actual fire to examine evacuation results, urban factors, and socioeconomic factors. And then additionally, they looked at awareness time. So they found that departure time and awareness time are positively correlated, pointing to the importance of awareness when dealing with emergency situations. So again, research has shown that people have to be able to assess that there's danger before they're willing to take action. Being younger, wealthier, male, and having a smartphone were all related to a faster awareness time. So this is important because if awareness is related to actual evacuation behavior, researchers need to understand what helps in increasing awareness time, because faster awareness time should lead to faster departure time. Another interesting finding was a social factor. So traffic became so congested based on the rapid spread of the fire that strangers would pick up stranded people and help transport them to safety. So this wasn't actually an aspect that was studied much in the research, but it does point to pro-social behavior in the midst of a dangerous situation. So as you'll see later on, my study focuses a lot on social cues, and so this would be another avenue to research just kind of the impact of strangers and in helping people even in stressful circumstances like a wildfire. Next, we'll turn to hurricane research. So hurricanes are different than other disasters in that often there is more warning. So coastal weather is monitored, and while there are fast-moving and sudden hurricanes, they are less likely than other disasters like wildfires. So a lot of times, especially in the United States, which is what happened in this scenario, hurricanes are monitored based on their trajectory, like in the Caribbean, and before they reach the states, such as Florida, North Carolina, South Carolina. So typically there's a little bit more warning for hurricanes. So this topic has been extensively studied, but different variables have been looked at throughout the studies. So I'm going to focus on two major studies that were done and the results regarding evacuation behavior. So first, there's a study by Billman et al., and he looked at Hurricane Irma that occurred in Florida, and they wanted to see if risk perception changed before and after the hurricane. So they used Qualtrics and unpaired t-tests to measure before and after data, specifically looking at risk perception, risk knowledge, involvement of the community, and self-efficacy. So it was found that risk knowledge did increase post-disaster, but the self-efficacy and the desire to learn more about hurricane safety measures decreased. So it was an interesting finding because the knowledge of risk and risk assessment went up, but participants weren't very motivated to do much with that knowledge. So that's an interesting finding as we're looking at improving safety measures. So they did say that part of this may have been due to the belief that hurricanes are not regular occurrences in need of preparation. So again, if people don't personalize the situation, a lot of times they won't necessarily take action to evacuate based on past research. Another issue was poor communication among community officials. So participants reported that communication was confusing at best. And this is important because without adequate warnings, it is difficult to make the best decisions in a crisis situation, particularly with natural disasters, because people rely heavily on evacuation orders and mandates and things of that nature. So if you have the community officials not appropriately communicating with citizens and residents, then it can actually hinder evacuation behavior. So, in fact, Roy et al. Specifically looked at information sources to better understand their role on evacuation. So, the researchers in this study also used an ABM, and they also used the American Community Survey to understand the influence of social networks, trust in hazard forecasts, and the impact of neighbor activity on decision making. So, they were looking at different ways that people got information about hurricane flooding, basically. So in the neighborhoods they were looking at, the concern was more with the flooding, not so much other aspects of the hurricane. But they were particularly interested in hazard forecasts, which are more communicated through like technology and community officials, and also social cues like the activity of neighbors and social networking. They found that information sources in the form of hazard forecasts did significantly affect evacuation behavior with more evacuation rates. So adequate hazard forecasts informed the participants and led to them evacuating faster. Social networks affected people differently because some people, the social networks encouraged them to leave, so there was greater evacuation rates, but for others it actually decreased evacuation rates. So this is an area that needs further study just to kind of determine what was going on in that situation. And then neighbor activity also played a role in evacuation. So this was also kind of mixed. So when neighbors evacuated, it led to more evacuation. However, when neighbors did not evacuate, it was correlated with less evacuation. So it did kind of point to the fact that neighbors do play a role in decision making, at least in this study. And as you'll see in other studies, it's mixed as far as sometimes neighbors don't play much of a role. So again, the social cues need to be further investigated. But this does point to the importance of social cues in high stress situations like natural disasters. Social cues will be the focus of my proposed study and have been looked at in other disasters as well. So I'll briefly discuss these other situations in the following slides. So now we'll move on to active shooter and physical attacks. So active shooter training is a unique emergency in that hiding is one of the suggested best practices. So as you can see in the picture, most of us have heard of the run, hide, and fight practices that are recommended, with running or evacuating being the ideal behavior, but hiding and fighting also considered appropriate if necessary. So this is a little bit different than other circumstances because typically you're not going to fight a hurricane or an earthquake, right? Wildfires are a little bit different, but still you're not going to physically fight them. But in active shooter training, that is an option if you've exhausted the other options like running and hiding. So I'm going to look at two different studies. The first study is the active shooter training study, and then the second study is actually involving physical attacks, not using a gun, but actually using a fake machete to kind of simulate an attack and look at participants' reactions. So the first study was done by Liu et al., and they looked at two scenarios. namely an office fire and an active shooter scenario. So their goal was to investigate the impact of training on evacuation behavior. So 4 groups were evaluated, 2 for the fire situation and 2 for the active shooter scenario. Video training of evacuation practices was provided for one of the groups in each situation. So there was 4 total groups. 2 of those groups received the training, and the other groups didn't. But they were all put through the same scenarios, broken up into 2 different groups. So two groups experienced fire, 2 groups experienced active shooter training. This was all virtually done, and non-player characters served as co-workers in the office setting for both scenarios. It was found that participants rated the active shooter training as more beneficial. And Liu et al. Posited that this was because active shooter training is seen less often in workplace settings. So fire training is pretty standard in offices and in businesses, but active shooter training is a little bit less used, and it's typically an event that happens less often, thankfully. But the participants found that the training was actually beneficial because they didn't necessarily know as much as those in the fire safety training group about what to do and how to evacuate. So less common sense behaviors such as crouching to avoid the smoke were also seen more in the training group. So again, things that people have traditionally been told, like when the fire alarm goes off, you evacuate, things like that. That wasn't really beneficial. So having training on that wasn't really found to be beneficial. But scenarios such as crouching, if you go out the door and there's a lot of smoke, crouching under the smoke to kind of protect yourself, that was actually found to be more helpful and had a higher rating in the training group than in the control groups. So interestingly, follower behavior, also known as herding behavior, was reduced in the training groups. So instead of following the group, those who had gotten the training kind of made their own autonomous decisions. So this is important because social cues can provide beneficial feedback to people, but it can also lead to an incorrect decision. So the study showed that training actually helped participants feel more independent and autonomous in their decision making rather than following the crowd. And again, some studies have pointed to the benefits of prosocial behavior and social cues and following the crowd, while others have pointed to the fact that it's not as beneficial. So this study was important because it actually reduced follower behavior. So then another study looked at physical attacks, and while this is a different scenario than active shooter training, it provides insight into feelings, behaviors, and social cues experienced by participants. So participants in this study by Yang and Ding were told that a mock attack would occur. So they were prepared because ethically the researchers couldn't put them through an attack scenario without them being informed that it was going to happen. But the goal was to evacuate as quickly as possible without being attacked. So it was found that despite the preparation, participants reported feelings of fear, nervousness, and confusion. And so this was interesting because they were told that they were going to get attacked, but the adrenaline was still going, and it still created feelings of fear, nervousness, and confusion. And participants were interviewed afterwards to identify these feelings. Additionally, social cues played a role. So participants reported that seeing someone else being attacked help them to break their confused state and move away to safety. This is important because this shows a potential for social learning. So seeing what has not worked for someone helps others make better decisions. Even though this was an extreme case, given the hypothetical casualties, social impact continues to be a topic of interest. So basically seeing somebody who was too slow and couldn't avoid the attack actually helped participants break out of the confused state that some of them reported and actually get out of the building or get out of the room faster and evacuate to safety. So that is an important topic of interest, even though it was an extreme case. So finally, we're going to look at building and house fires. These two studies were done more with building fires, but some of the applications can be applied to house fires as well. So building fires have been studied as these are common occurrences. So again, office fires, building fires, they're pretty commonplace. For example, the National Fire Protection Association, or NFPA, reported in 2021 there were 1.35 million fires and 3,800 deaths. So it is an area we're studying to help improve safety and save lives, because it obviously happens quite often and it does lead to substantial loss of life. So the effects of a group on fire evacuation is important to research because it may differ based on the characteristics of the fire. So Zhang et al. 2023 looked at fire situations involving different levels of visibility. So they divided participants into 3 groups, and the control group had normal visibility. The other groups had either 9% visibility or 27% visibility. And this was meant to simulate smoke in a fire and the impact of evacuation behavior. So eye patches were worn by participants and obstacles were placed around the room. It was found that in normal visibility, individuals evacuated faster if they were alone versus in a group. However, in the low visibility conditions, evacuation occurred faster when in a group than alone. So the researchers posited that this could be due to social cues and a reduction in anxiety when in a group under stressful circumstances such as lack of visibility. So obviously human beings are pretty visual creatures. So cutting sight off, the researchers posited that creates anxiety. But when you're in a group situation and you're around other people that can help direct you to safety, that can help, calm you down, they found that was actually helpful. But it wasn't helpful when sight wasn't obscured at all. So this is an important finding because it shows that, again, social cues can help in certain circumstances, but not in every circumstance, and that's worth more study. So similar to Zhang et al. 2023, another study was done by a different group of researchers, also named Zhang et al., but they did it in 2022, and they examined the role of social factors on evacuation decisions, but they didn't use a fire simulation. It was similar to the evacuation in that participants had to choose the correct exit, and observation of others played a role in this decision, but it was more just looking specifically at evacuation behavior, given that there were various exits to choose from. So there were also false exits placed around the room to see how participants would react. And additionally, they also looked at the role of help. So they had positioned people called guides with signs pointing to exits to help direct individuals. But they were positioned in different locations, again, to determine participant reaction. So they were looking at, does it help to have guides or not? And was there a specific location that was more helpful than others? So 2 conditions were used, low stress and high stress. So the high stress condition was created by offering an incentive to those who evacuated fastest. So everybody in the study received a financial incentive, but the researchers basically told participants a certain amount of people who evacuate first will get more money. So that was to try to kind of create this high stress or competitive situation to measure the effect on evacuation behavior. It was found that under the low stress condition, guides were unhelpful. So it didn't really help to have a guide if there was no stress. Participants didn't find them to be beneficial to helping them to find an exit faster. However, under the high stress condition, participants found that the guides were helpful under certain circumstances. So this was important. It wasn't that guides were helpful in every different circumstance. Every circumstance, it was found that only in certain circumstances. So the guides had to be far enough away for participants to see them and across from the correct exit for them to be helpful. So distance was actually more beneficial because some of the guides were positioned closer to participants, but participants didn't always see them, just based on the design of the room. So the guides that were further away were actually more helpful because they were easier to see. This is important because it demonstrates that helping behavior is not equal and that some ways of helping may be more advantageous than others. Additionally, viewing another participant find the right exit reduce evacuation time of other participants. So again, there were false exits placed around the room, and so people would observe others to see what they did, and if they found the right exit, then obviously the participants knew that was the right way to go, and it increased evacuation time. So this again points to the impact of social cues, and it will be discussed more when gaps in the research are discussed, because there was a certain aspect of the experiment that that should be explored more. Okay, so before explaining my proposed study and why it is needed, I want to discuss how this topic factors into a biblical worldview. So the study is evacuation behavior and psychological factors, but safety is a huge aspect of that. The whole point is to understand these behaviors and the factors that influence these behaviors to help make people more safe in dangerous situations. So keeping oneself and others safe is a biblical concept. To understand this, though, one must first understand the role people play as believers. So God is the Heavenly Father of Christians. And you can see that in Romans 8:15. With this comes a protective nature. And so the first place to start with the discussion of safety is recognizing that God is the ultimate protector and defender. Psalm 121:8 says that God watches us as we come and go. Psalms 18:2 describes God as a shield and stronghold for his children. Some of the most famous accounts of the Bible revolve around God's protection. So Daniel is a prime example. In Daniel, there's two examples. So Daniel 3:19 through 26 depicts the account of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego being saved from the fire by the Lord. And then Daniel 6:10 through 23 gives an account of Daniel being saved from the lion's den by God. So God is also the defender of his people. Romans 11:26 through 27 talks about how Israel will be saved by God. And then in Joshua 1:9, God tells Joshua not to be afraid because he is with him and the people as they battle other nations. So therefore, God is also the defender of believers. So he's the protector and the defender. So while safety starts with God, it does not end there, as he expects believers to take action as well. And this is where this topic comes into play. Christians are to be sober-minded, use wisdom, and make godly choices. And you can see that in 1 Peter 5:8, Proverbs 19:8, and Romans 12:2. When looking at safety, reckless behaviors are counter to God's design and expectations. Additionally, helping others is paramount for a believer, as it is one of God's commandments. 1 Timothy 4:16 says to listen to God's word and do what he asks to protect oneself and others. While many verses are referring to spiritual protection, this can also be applied to physical protection. After all, 1 Corinthians 6:19 through 20 tells believers that our bodies are the temple of the Holy Spirit and that they belong to God. It admonishes us to glorify God in all areas, including by taking care of our bodies for his purposes. Therefore, safety is something God gives believers and also something he expects believers to engage in during day-to-day life. So sometimes we don't think about taking care of ourselves as safety, or making good decisions as safety, but it all factors in because we were given wisdom and the ability to follow God, to keep ourselves safe and to do the work that he's called us to do. And if we're not safe and we don't keep ourselves safe and we make poor decisions, then we can't honor God and we can't live to glorify him. So how does this apply to my topic of evacuation behavior and psychological factors? Well, one way it applies is by gaining wisdom into how God made us and how these characteristics come into play during an emergency situation. So, as shown in past research, men are more likely to try to defend their homes in fire situations than women. And this makes sense given that the Bible says men are typically physically stronger than women and are to use that strength to love. Love includes protection. Knowing this, evacuation strategies can be geared toward helping men be the defenders that they are, while also following the wisest choices. Um, so, so it's important to understand psychological factors and what influences people's decision making, because it helps us to honor the way that God made us, but also to uh, help make wise choices and help encourage other people to make wise choices. So another way that safety from a biblical perspective applies to my topic is because evacuation behavior does not occur in a normal situation. The situation is perceived as being dangerous and potentially life-threatening before an evacuation is initiated. So drills are meant to practice these behaviors to be prepared for a real-life emergency. Given that man-made and natural disasters can end in loss of life, it is important to research better ways to encourage efficient and effective evacuation. And this is because God gave human beings life to live, and this life is precious in His sight. And you can see that in 1 Timothy 3:16 and Psalms 139:13 through 14, where God talks about forming people in their mother's womb and being very intentional about how people are made. So God wants us to protect life. Therefore, learning more about evacuation behavior and psychological factors has the potential to preserve life and honor God who gave it. So this leads into the reason for my proposed study. I've presented several studies on various evacuation scenarios and different emergencies. However, there is a gap in the literature regarding social factors, training, and viewing the wrong decisions. So, some studies have been done on the right behaviors and the right decisions, but not a lot of research has been done on when peers and neighbors make the wrong decisions. So Liu et al. Conducted the fascinating study about the impact of training on active shooter and fire scenarios. However, one of the limitations of the study was that the non-player characters made rational decisions. Since this was a simulation, the non-player characters served as the peers of the participants in the virtual environment. So seeing them make rational choices may have skewed the data, as participants may have followed their lead and evacuated quickly because of it, because obviously those characters were programmed to make the right decisions. So while follower behavior was shown to diminish after the training videos were viewed, it still presents a potential confounding variable. Investigating how peers impact participants when they do not make the right decision is an area in need of further study, and that'll factor into my research. So 2 studies seem to shed light on wrong choices and the impact of them. However, they also have limitations. So Yang and Ding did the study on physical attacks and found that viewing someone being attacked actually helped the viewer to make a better choice and run. While it would be wrong to try to blame actual attacks on the victims, the study did demonstrate a failure to evacuate quickly enough to avoid the attack and the social learning that occurred as a result. However, the factor of self-preservation may have played a role in this result rather than pure influence. So it was an attack situation, and self-preservation is a big factor for people, and this wasn't really investigated in the study, so it needs further investigation. But that could have played a role rather than the pure influence. So it's important to kind of assess, which factor, or if it was maybe both factors playing a role. So, self-preservation is a more individualized variable. So the goal of my study is to examine peer and authority influences on behavior when a wrong choice is made, which is a different goal than Yang and Ding's study. So also Zhang et al. Did incorporate false exits into their study on evacuation behavior. However, one limitation of this study was the instruction by the researchers not to speak during the event. So only nonverbal communication was allowed. In a real-life evacuation scenario, various forms of communication may be utilized, including verbal, and therefore my study seeks to examine verbal cues as well. So in addition to these issues, there are further gaps in the literature. Most of the studies were interested in evacuation time, environmental and informational factors, and building an evacuation route design. While social cues such as neighbor input and subconscious reassurance from the group in high-stress situations were studied, most of the studies were focused more on efficiency in evacuation. While my study does touch on this as well, the main point of the study is to examine social factors versus training to determine which is stronger. The point of this is to determine next steps as far as preparing people for evacuation, while taking into account social relationships that may develop during the evacuation experience. While evacuation time is assessed, it is in the context of determining decision making based on training and rational factors rather than route or building efficiency. So I'm going to begin my study with describing the purpose statement. So the purpose of my study is to evaluate social cues and pressures on evacuation decisions in the event of an office building fire. Both the influence of authority figures and peers on decision making will be investigated. The reason for this inquiry is in a crisis situation, often quick thinking is necessary to prevent harm to self or even death. As shown, past research has demonstrated that social cues, relationships, and leadership do affect evacuation decisions. Zhang et al. Pointed out that following leaders can be beneficial in certain circumstances, but not in every circumstance. Other studies have found that social cues do not impact decision making, so therefore it is important to evaluate these phenomena further, particularly when personal knowledge conflicts with the actions of peers and authority figures. So there are two research questions. The first research question is, how do the actions of peers and authority figures impact individual decision making during an evacuation? The second research question is, do people rely on recent training more than they rely on peer and authority figures' influence, or do they rely on social cues more during a crisis situation? So the reason these questions are asked in this way is because I'm not hypothesizing any specific direction in the results. The point is to first determine if there are effects of peers and authority figures, and if this is a stronger determinant of behavior than training, or if training is stronger. I do hypothesize that not everyone will fall perfectly into either category, so the hypothesis is that some people will follow authority figures and peers, and others won't, and others will make autonomous decisions. So just to clarify, the hypotheses are that the actions of peers and authority figures do impact individual decision making, and that some participants will follow those actions while others will follow their training. Again, it is an exploratory study to determine significance, but not necessarily direction. So hypothesis 3 is different percentages of participants will make decisions based on the influences of peers and authority figures, while others will make decisions based on their training. So it's non-directional. So before I go into depth about the methods, I just want to present a basic description of the study. The setting is an office building where participants will be role-playing as staff members. Participants will be divided into a control group or two experimental groups. So there will be 3 groups in total. So one experimental group is for peer influence and the other is for authority figure influence. Every participant will undergo fire evacuation video training that emphasizes evacuating the building when the fire alarm sounds. There will also be 2 members of the research team who serve as peers and 1 member who serves as an authority figure. The research members will utilize wrong decision making, and cameras will be utilized throughout the building to determine who followed peers and the authority figure and who followed their own choices. 1 false exit will be used in the study, and this is the exit that the research members will run to during the evacuation. The video training will have clearly shown participants the real exits throughout the building, and the false exit will not be presented in the training video. So basically the training doesn't mention a false exit, but it is present in the building, and the research members who are serving as plants basically with the participants will actually run to the false exit. So now I'm going to explain more thoroughly about the methods of the study. So we'll start with participants. So based on an a priori power analysis, 70 participants will be included in the study. They will be recruited through online websites for 2 local universities, as well as through paper flyers at coffee shops and local businesses to attempt to obtain a representative sample of participants. So the goal is to recruit around the same amount of men and women of varying ages, if possible. And ethnicity is also taken into account in socioeconomic status. Um, the study is done in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and so recruitment will specifically involve businesses in the different regions of the city. So in Albuquerque, there is a Northeast Heights area where typically a wealthier population resides. There's a West Side area where ethnicities and socioeconomics are varied. There's a Southeast area where wealthier and poorer neighborhoods coincide, depending on the street. And there's a Southwest area where more crime and lower income neighborhoods exist. So recruitment will occur in all of these areas to attempt to obtain a representative sample. And the office building used in the study will also be centrally located so as to mitigate travel issues for those in poorer neighborhoods. The inclusion criteria for participants is being 18 or older, being physically able to maneuver in an office building, which can include those in wheelchairs, as long as they're able to maneuver, and able to understand and speak English based on the video training. So the exclusion criteria includes under the age of 18, and this is because the desired sample and population that we're targeting are adults. They're the focus of the study. And further exclusion criteria include not able to maneuver in an office building without assistance. So as long as they can maneuver by themselves, that they can be included in the study. But if they need assistance from others, they would be excluded just for the purposes of the study. And unable to understand and speak English. So informed consent will be signed, and participants will be told that the purpose of the research study is to examine evacuation behavior during common danger scenarios. All three groups of participants will undergo fire safety and evacuation video-based training that specifically addresses the office's exits and evacuation plan. So to understand the study, the building layout must be discussed, just to give more insight into the study. The building is a single-story office building with 16 offices and 2 conference rooms. There are a total of 4 exits, 2 in the back of the building and 2 on the sides of the building. The entrance can also serve as an exit. However, the video training only discusses the back and side exits. And there's a reason for this. The back exits are located closer to the right and left sides, with no actual exits in the center of the back of the building. However, to test the hypothesis that social cues impact decision making, there will be a false exit made to look identical to the other exits, and this exit will be in the center of the back of the building. And again, it will not be included on the training video. The hypothetical fire will occur in the lobby area behind the reception desk and be caused by a match carelessly thrown in the trash can after lighting a candle. And this is why, too, the entrance isn't on the video, the training video, as an exit. At the same time, I mean, people do go through the entrance to exit the building, so that will be monitored as well. So if anyone does go through the entrance, that will give us some more data on behavior. Several cameras will monitor the offices and conference rooms from various angles to capture footage of the participants evacuating. So participants will be randomly assigned to one of the 3 groups: a control group, a peer group, and an authority figure group. The control group will have 10 participants, and the 2 experimental groups will have 30 participants each. Every participant will receive the video training, which will be discussed shortly. The study will be run over several days to break up the groups and create a smaller office environment. So the first group will be the control group. They will be divided into 2 groups of 5 participants. And there's a reason for this. So basically, we want to look at individual behavior, so we don't want to have too many people seeing each other. So we just broke it up into 2 groups of 5 participants to make it a little easier. On the day of the study, the participants will either be assigned to a morning shift or an afternoon shift. The 5 participants will come in and be told they are meeting with a colleague who has not arrived yet. They will each be individually led to an office and will sit alone to wait. The offices that will be used will be spaced out enough to ensure that participants do not immediately see another participant when the fire alarm is activated. So when they exit their office, the goal is for them not to see anybody else around, because we're trying to measure individual choices, and that's why they're serving as a control group. The fire alarm will be activated and participants will move to the exits. This serves as a control group because participants are making individual decisions rather than having other people around them. In the event that a participant does see another participant and they work together in some capacity to evacuate, the camera footage will be reviewed to determine if the participants were heading to an exit before they saw each other. If they were, then this will be considered their exit of choice, regardless of if they end up leaving through it or not. So basically what we want to look at is, were they intending, by gaze or by moving toward an exit to go to that exit, but then they saw another participant, which hopefully doesn't happen because we're spacing out the participants, but if it does, and they see another participant and then they change their decision and exit through a different exit based on social cues, we'll consider their intended exit as the exit of choice. So then the second group will be the peer group. This group will be broken up into 3 groups of 10 participants. The smaller groups will be assigned to the morning or afternoon shifts over a 2-day period. This is to minimize how many people are in the building at one time and to gain more in-depth feedback on behavior. So each group of 10 participants will be escorted to a conference room on their day and time of the study. 2 additional team members will join them, but unbeknownst to the participants, these individuals will be part of the research team, but they'll act like the participants, and the participants will be unaware. The group will be told that they are meeting as a business team and discussing updates on the workflow of the company. Prompt cards will be given to each participant with suggestions on what to discuss to make the roles more realistic. So we want them to just be having a meeting and being as realistic as possible. So prompt cards will be given to them just to give them some ideas on what to discuss. And then the fire alarm will be activated and the participants will evacuate. The 2 research team members will encourage everyone to leave the building. So they'll encourage them through, hey, everybody, let's go, some kind of a phrase like that to just kind of encourage everybody to leave. However, rather than heading towards a real exit, the research team members will head towards the false exit. Participants will be analyzed to see how many people follow their peers and if any follow the 2 research team members towards an exit that was not indicated in the training. This is to determine the impact of peers on decision making versus training. So the third group will be similar to the second group. However, the groups of 10 will be joined by a research team member unbeknownst to them, and they will be told that the team member is their boss. The boss will engage them in a presentation about recent budget changes. So again, just trying to make it normal and realistic. They're having a budget meeting, basically. And then the fire alarm will be activated, and the boss will again encourage everyone to leave the building. The boss will head towards the false exit, and participants will be analyzed to see if they follow the boss or make their own decision of a real exit based on the training they received. This is to examine the impact of authority figures on evacuation behavior. Okay, so next I'll discuss the measures used in the study. So the measures used to gather the information include observational data and post-event interviews. So the observational data will be gathered through 5 different cameras positioned throughout the office building, as well as 1 camera in each conference room and 1 camera in each of the offices included in the control group. So the cameras are Hikvision 8 megapixel color view, strobe light, and audible warning fixed turret network cameras with a 2.8 millimeter lens. So these cameras were chosen specifically because they offer 24/7 color imaging, high resolution ability, and high performing sensors. They provide real-time data into the different actions of participants, including being able to capture gaze. So this is important because it helps determine evacuation intention. To interpret the data and analyze it based on the post-event interviews, each participant will also be asked to wear a jacket in various colors. So this was actually used in a previous study where they used colorful hats to just identify who each participant was, because they will be interviewed, but when we're examining the camera data, we just want to see for ourselves what they actually did. So this provides researchers with a way to identify them as the data is interpreted. Additionally, the two research members in the peer group will talk after each trial to discuss their observations of the participants. Any disputes regarding the observations will be compared to the camera feeds. This is to gather more information from people who actually experienced the event in person. The research team member in the authority figure group will also discuss his observations with the larger research team. So we'll talk to them just about their experience. And although these are qualitative data, they add value in understanding the different dynamics of the group. So another measure that will be used is post-event interview questions. These questions will gather information on the thought processes of the participants, including what they feel influenced their behavior, their thoughts about exit choice, and their assessment of their ability to evacuate from the building quickly. And I'll present the actual interview questions in a later slide. Participant views of the training video and if it was helpful or not to them personally will also be asked, along with asking for any feedback on the study. So this is just to gather qualitative data on what the participants' experiences were. And a thematic analysis will then be conducted to identify the most cited viewpoints and themes that emerge from the data. Once the data are collected, factorial ANOVA will be utilized. The independent variables of the study are social pressures with the levels of peer and authority and training. So there's two IVs. One is social pressures, and with two levels, peer and authority, and then the training is the other IV. The dependent variable is the exit chosen by participants, and since the study has two independent variables, a factorial ANOVA will be calculated. So along with the measures, it is important to outline the interventions. So for the video training, the National Fire Protection Association's evacuation training will be utilized. So this is a brief training video on knowing the building layout and evacuation plan, the importance of following alarm prompts, and important decision-making advice. So the purpose of this video is to emphasize the need to evacuate when the alarm sounds. Following this video, another video providing a virtual tour of the office building where the study will occur will play, and each exit will be clearly identified. However, the video again will not show the false exit as one of the viable exits. This is to test how well participants absorb the training. The other interventions include the planting of research team members within the group to create the social factors studied. So as previously mentioned, there are several interview questions that will be asked. So this is one of the measures that will be used, and the interview questions include the following. What was your overall experience of the study? Did you end up choosing a correct exit? And if not, what do you think influenced your decision to choose the false exit? Was there anything that influenced your choice of exit? How do you think you did with evacuating the building successfully? Do you believe you evacuated quickly? Were there any hindrances to your evacuation? What did you think of the training videos? Were the videos helpful in preparing you for the study or not? Do you have any feedback about the study? So a lot of these are, well, almost all of these are open-ended questions because we just want to hear their own perspectives on their experiences, on the training videos, and on any peer and authority influences that they noticed. So the purpose of this research study is to provide valuable information regarding social factors affecting evacuation behavior. Additionally, the effective training is also analyzed. So the findings from the study would further the research area by providing insight into both positive and negative aspects of social pressures. So the study examines both peer pressures and the role of authority, making it valuable in understanding how salient leadership behavior and expectations and colleague actions are to decision making. So as previously mentioned, some of the studies, past research has shown that leadership does have an impact, peers and neighbors have an impact, but the study is trying to go further as far as making the wrong choices and how impactful that is for evacuation behavior. The findings also present an opportunity to assess the efficacy of training. So the idea is if the training makes more of a difference on exit choice, then training programs can be pushed more among businesses to increase safety and swift evacuation in the event of an emergency. While the findings would be limited to office evacuation based on the research design, particularly regarding fires, it would help solve an emergency that is commonplace and can affect anyone in the workforce. We obviously have a lot of people working in offices, and so this would benefit a great deal of people. Therefore, the results of this study have the potential to mitigate harm and fatalities from office fires. It also adds to past research regarding psychological factors. If the findings show that social factors did not significantly affect evacuation behavior, then this is insightful from a psychological perspective. It would highlight autonomy in decision making and lead to further inquiry into other factors that may influence autonomous behavior. The study, therefore, would generate more questions in future studies. So, in conclusion, evacuation behavior and psychological factors have been studied with different variables of interest in various emergency situations. Most of the research has focused on fires and hurricanes, with additional studies on tsunamis and active shooter scenarios. Research has shown that social factors may influence evacuation behavior, but studies are divided on this phenomenon. This warrants future research, and my proposed study seeks to add to the knowledge base in this area. Specifically, my proposed study seeks to examine if social pressures from both peers and authority figures have an impact on evacuation decisions, and if so, do they have more of an impact on training than training? Conversely, does training have more of an impact? The study will be done in an office building with 3 groups of participants representing the different conditions. Observational data through camera feeds and interview questions will be analyzed to determine significance based on an F-test. The findings will add to current research by highlighting the importance of influences in training on evacuation behavior among adults. So this concludes my presentation. The following slides are all my resources and references. I hope you enjoyed this topic, and I thank you for listening.